Yeah, so now like the radical feminist movement now they also advocate for the inclusivity of other identities that aren't biblical. Like it used to be just women, and now we're like, oh, we're advocating for men who are women and women who are men and not men or women. Like I'm like I don't know. Hey folks, this is Kat.
And this is Trevor.
Welcome to our episode number 3. Last episode we were talking about masculinity and the lack thereof and weak men. And we talked a little bit about the rising feminist movement and just how the roles have kind of been reversed on like men and women, and just how that's kind of being like really destructive to our society.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I wanted to start with a biblical perspective on how a woman or a mother specifically and a wife should act and what her main role is. And so obviously I'm going to Proverbs 31, very classic. So, number 1, she takes care of the children, if she has children, raises them up with love and godly instruction, alongside with the father. She takes care of the home, works hard at whatever she does, and she can also provide for her family. It is said that she makes garments and sells her work, and she buys a vineyard and makes profit. Yet the man is still head of the house and works hard to provide for his wife and kids. So, something that I read a while ago is that this example here is she's actually an entrepreneur, and she where she buys a vineyard and makes profit from it. So I thought that was really interesting, that it has that example in the Bible. She still makes an income for her family, but does it in a way that she can still stay home with her kids and stuff.
Yeah.
So.
And yeah, I think it's really important that a woman works for sure. Like, we're all meant for something, right? We are all built to work in something, right? Whether that be, if it's, a man, they usually go for higher, heavy, more heavy lifting, more heavy work. And that's just because of biological,
Yeah.
How biology works, right? Physical strength. And, in society, I think it's almost expected that women should be with the whole thing with the pay gap and all that stuff. It's they're trying to have men in the same and women in the same career path, which I think in some cases is it's okay, but unfortunately if you there's so many instances where a woman gets put into the oil field and is almost sexually abused or harassed just because of the workforce and the unsafe work conditions, and that's just because of culture nowadays too. So yeah, there's good reasons why women work for sure, and there's just there's definitely places for them to work and places for them to stay away from, just because of the fact that some are built for men, some are built more for women, right?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. That's a good point to make. And, I feel like I kind of used to have that perspective where women can do pretty much everything men can do to a certain degree. But I also totally agree with that, the fact there are some positions that are just generally not a great position for a woman to be in. And I feel like in kind of every or most careers or jobs, there's probably a position that is right for a woman to work in.
Exactly.
I'm not saying that that is the case for every woman. There are some people I think it's really cool how some women serve in the military, but there has to be safe conditions that they can operate in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Whether it's separating, if you have enough women separating the sleeping or whatever. Anyway, just things like that. And same as firefighters. I think there are some great opportunity for women to be firefighters because they can fit in small spaces, and but then at the same time they may not be as strong to lift a 300 pound man out. So like, you kind of have to weigh each circumstance, and I feel like God has placed a desire and a purpose in everyone's heart. And
Yeah.
so whether you want to be married and have kids, or whether you have a mission field elsewhere,
Yeah.
like we can serve in many areas, not just in family, though that's what I feel like God intended for us. We're supposed to multiply and rule the earth. So
Yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, God made us for certain tasks in life, and you know, there are some women that are definitely stronger than other women, and that's just, that's how God made us, and that's what God puts us in. Like, that's what God wants us to lead through, right? So yeah, there's definitely, I 100% agree. Like, there's purposes for many people, for sure, for everyone,
yeah,
honestly, not just some people, everyone.
yeah. Yeah, and a couple other things in that it says in Proverbs is a wife stands by her husband and does him good all her life. I feel like, I mean, it's kind of another whole concept, but just I feel like a lot of marriages these days are failing just because they don't seek to serve each other, and seek to actually stand up for each other.
Yeah.
And it's really sad because we're supposed to, like, the word submission in the Bible is actually not just for the woman. It's actually for both. It's
Yeah.
supposed to be a partnership. You're supposed to collectively agree on issues, and not
Exactly.
just be like, yeah, I agree, like the husband should have a kind of a final say in a lot of things, unless he's not, living out his faith and like going in a completely opposite direction.
Hmm.
Where like there are some instances that, one is a believer, one is not, and the mom has to raise her kids with her faith and take control of that. So it really is hard because our culture has changed over time from the Bible, but the Bible always stays the same.
Yeah.
So there may be different, like maybe taken in a different light, but it's still truth. Truth is truth, and truth doesn't change.
Yeah, for sure. That's a very good point. And yeah, like, I think that's again, like, a lot of the reasons why marriages are failing is, yes, we don't, like, we all, oftentimes I feel like relationships often just go too fast, and like people are either, already having kids before they're married, or it goes super fast, and before they know it they're married, and they're maybe having second thoughts because they took this too fast, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, I think, and there's a debate to be had with, like, political perspectives, but definitely values are such an important thing when associating with the opposite sex for, like, romantic and marriage reasons and everything. And that's just because, like, yes, values, you are, like, the last episode, right? You are who you hang out with, right?
Yep.
Right? And you can either be the bigger person, or you can end up like the person that you are hanging out with, right? So yeah, there's definitely important things that, yeah, just are not being reached with marriages. How values are not really an important thing, which it very much is.
Yeah. I think, I don't know, to raise a family it's a great thing, but I know not everyone has that desire, and that's totally fine.
Yeah.
But if we do become parents, we're supposed to be parents in God's image, because He is our Father and He's the ultimate. We're supposed to follow after His qualities, I guess.
So yeah, there's coming back to, like, how we should, like, we be raising our kids in God's image, right? Matthew 18:6, it says, "If anyone causes one of these little ones, those who believe in me, to stumble, it would be better for them to have a large millstone hung around their neck and to be drowned in the depths of the sea," right? So graphic verse, but it's very true. Like, when we raise our kids, we have to be very serious about, what we teach them, right? And values. Like, again, like, values. That's the reason why so many kids are, like, not raised in a good home, is because they don't know their values. The parents themselves don't align perfect values, and therefore it creates a very broken foundation that, maybe, kids are being fed almost opposite values, right, at the same time, right? And so confusion happens, and that's one of the problems in society too, right?
Yeah, like if the parents don't know who they are as a person and they don't know their identity, how's their kids supposed to figure that out? Like,
Exactly
we're
right.
supposed to be really firm in our foundation. I feel like even before you have kids, you should really consider who you yourself is, like who you are in Christ, who you are what you believe in, what you stand for, so you can portray that to your kids, and that will create, strong. You want, like, I heard this thing, like, you're not raising kids, you're raising young adults. So you want to make sure that you're feeding them the right information, the right um, uh, portrayal of the world
Yeah.
from Christ's view.
And kids are very impressionable, right? So like they like
Yeah.
a lot of kids, they'll just listen to something and they'll believe it instantly, right? Because again, when you're young, your brain's still developing. You don't really understand that someone could lie to you, right? Like I was taught from a very young age that like lying was wrong, and yes, people do lie, right? But like some kids, don't have that reality. So that's what happens is like, and that's the thing, right? Like you have to be so careful what you tell children and any kind like that, whether that be like, if you're like a youth pastor, you got to be careful what you tell them, your kids, like anything, right? And anybody, right? You just got to be careful about the information you spread, especially when it comes to um, stuff that is immorally wrong, especially when when it's wrong too, like knowingly
Yeah.
spreading bad act and stuff to a child.
Yeah. And that teaching children also relates to how much time you actually have with your kids. Like
Yes.
nowadays, if a woman does have a career and she's gone and the children are put in childcare, you don't really know what's going on there. Like,
Yep. It's either that or the internet, and we talked about that last episode where it's like,
mm-hmm.
if the parent doesn't raise you, then who does? Like who teaches you the values of society, right? Right? And
Yeah.
guess what happens, right? We have kids who are confused and everything, right? And like that's the thing, and it's really sad how you know the way parents get a break is just by giving them Cocomelon to watch for 2 hours straight and out of a day, right? It's honestly really sad to see that because these kids are being overstimulated at a young age. They're being taught in a habit way to be stimulated all the time, which can cause a lot of issues down the road.
Yeah, like I've been reading a book and it's talking about boundaries that some people as a child, their boundaries were like overpassed, and so they were victims as young children, whether that's emotional abuse or like every type basically, and that is what takes the longest to heal, is because that is in your, like you said, your impressionable years, that your brain
Yes.
is still trying to figure out how the world works, and when you're abused like that and people take advantage of you, that can really create a screwed up view of how you look at the world, and it's really sad.
It's really
Hmm.
sad, and the other thing is like TikTok now a thing, basically just softcore pornography nowadays. Like kids are being exposed to pornography at like 8 or
Yeah.
9, even 7. Like it is, and literally soliciting explicit photos to a minor is a crime,
Yep.
right? And it's happening just like that, and no one's it's just getting flown under the radar, right? And that's like again that sticks with you. Um, Countless of research like sexual assault is and rape and all the things, it's definitely traumatizing for anybody anywhere, but with a kid it's way worse because that sticks, right? And it's because again you're in impressionable years, your brain is still developing. um it really sticks with you, and that's with pornography being such like a normal thing growing up in Gen Z, right? Like you gotta it definitely screws up with children's minds and kind of makes them perverted even if they don't mean
Yep.
it. It's really sad.
So yeah, that about women having careers, they, a lot of them argue, at least, like the definition actually of feminism that I looked on like Google is belief or advocacy of women's social, political, and economic rights, especially with regard to equality of the sexes. And I don't really have a problem with that definition,
Me neither.
because like in the beginning it really was for equality, like whether it was voting rights for women, equal pay, and some of that in some countries is still issues. Like we even have, I think, it's not always equal pay. I'm not really sure.
Yeah.
Um, but it was like those were to protect women, to see women as actual people with a say in things, and so they have more control over their life. Because yes, I think men are supposed to be in most leadership positions. I especially think of that like in the church, especially like as a pastor and even a president. Like I think that the majority should be a man, because that's just, we kind of talked about last episode. That's their role. They have more,
Mm-hmm.
they handle conflict better, I think, in most situations.
Yeah.
Um, but in it says Galatians 3:28 in the Bible. It says, "There's neither Jew nor Greek, there's neither slave nor free, there's no male and female, for you are all one in Jesus Christ." So that
Mm-hmm.
says right there, we are all made equal by God. And I know people in the past, present, whatever, have abused that kind of that word of
Yeah.
equal, like, and hasn't really, when the women's suffrage movement actually started, um, like women didn't have much say over their household or their money or
Yeah.
what they did really. And I do totally agree that we should have equal voting rights, equal pay.
Yeah.
So I'm not against that, but nowadays the feminist movement takes the femininity out of it and makes it so women feel the need to either be more masculine or to reduce men's masculinity.
That's a really good point. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, like, and I'm not saying, like, it really depends on the definition of feminism, because, like I said, that definition that I searched up, I agree with that.
Yeah.
But now that definition has been skewed. So when you're having an argument with someone, whether it's about this or whatever it is, it's really important to define your terms. Because you could
Yes.
be on the same page and you don't even know it, because you're still, like, your terms could be different.
100%. And the left is constantly changing definitions, guys. Like, it is
Yeah.
insane. The definition of vaccine even changed. Like, a lot of stuff is just
yeah.
changed subtly under the radar. Yeah, I completely agree with that definition of feminism right there. But yeah, it's definitely been more radicalized a lot. We've moved from, fundamental rights that every single human being should have to, I have the right to decide whether, I should kill a child in my womb or not, right? And it's like, that's definitely like overreaching the rights of the child. In
Yeah.
terms of equal pay, like I'm completely for equal pay. I think there is some circumstances where like men, I think, should be get paid higher, and that's just because, when it comes to like heavy lifting and stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's just, women can't, do as much in that situation. And I'm not saying that they can't. There's a lot of women that can for sure, but I think that's partially why a lot of the pay gap is a problem in there. It's just because of the fact, like, yes, like, in some situations, women can't complete as much in that situation as men, right? And I think that's the issue. In terms of like, like if it's like a normal like engineering job where like, both can accomplish the same things, I think the pay gap should be equal there for sure. I think there's some circumstances where I think it's just because of the fact, like, some people are made for different areas, like I said before, right?
Yeah, I guess it depends on the job, really, and like the position.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It depends on the circumstance. It's all circumstantial, right? So.
Yeah, a lot of this is, and that's the tricky part of like seeing the black from the white and the gray area between. Like,
yeah, for sure.
It depends on the person. It depends on the job, where you come from. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like what you were raised. I don't know.
Like
a lot of that.
I wouldn't be surprised if a woman who was a babysitter got paid more than a man who was a babysitter. I just personally like a woman's better at that, right? Like they're literally made for raising or like, watching over a kid, right? So like that's the thing, right? Like it depends on the job, right? So yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, so now like the radical feminist movement now they also advocate for the inclusivity of other identities that aren't biblical. Like it used to be just women, and now we're like, oh, we're advocating for men who are women and women who are men and not men or women. Like I'm like,
or men who claim or have a uterus, but they're still a man, but they still have rights because they have a Yeah, it's messed up nowadays, bro.
I just don't understand. Like, we have strayed so far, and it's so sad to see because we lose the vision that the people before us had, like whether it's the forefathers or the early women's suffrage, like that
Mm-hmm.
movement. And I love listening to just the history and the vision that people had, you know?
Yeah.
I was listening to something today, like the reason some of those orators or those people who really stood up for a cause that was not common at the time, people followed them because they had a dream, they had a vision, and they
Yep.
didn't say, "Oh, you should follow me or listen to me because I have a plan," right? They
Yep.
not all of them had a plan. It's like, no, I have a dream of what it should look like. I'm taking
Yep.
Martin Luther for an example. Like he had a dream of what life should look like. It should be equal for all men of different races and all.
Yep.
I also think like all men and women as a like all together, right?
Mm-hmm.
But now they're like that was inclusivity at that time is all men, women, races, all of us were created equal, but now
Yeah.
all genders are equal, and that's not biblical, right? We've strayed so far from that biblical definition of gender, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It's really sad to see what the definition of the American dream has become. Very
Yeah.
skewed, right? Like it's actually Tom McDonald, the rapper, actually said this. We went to bed with the American dream. We woke up in Nightmerica.
Oh,
Fireverse.
yeah.
It's so good though, because it exactly explains what has happened, right? We've shifted the definition of the American dream is like life, liberty, and like freedom for all, and now it's shifted to don't offend anybody, be afraid what you say because you don't want to. And how dare you offend anybody, and include every single person, even though it goes against your values and beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, that's the beginning of like the fall of like a society because like we are all becoming slowly more divided because of this inclusivity where we're trying to like normalize pedophilia for some people, like minor attracted people, like that's a thing now, right? And so we have areas where people are accepting of that and people are not, and that's dividing, and that's just one area, bro. That is one area, right? So we're so divided on a lot of things, and that's what the government wants. So like yeah, it's crazy how like definitions have just like switched in society just to
Hmm.
like make it defiled a lot more.
Yeah. Like children are supposed to be protected. They're precious people, and we need to, I don't know, like look out for each other, I guess. Like there's so much, the world is full of danger. It always has been, but nowadays it's like people are even thinking like, "Oh, should I have a child in this world?" because it's becoming so um dangerous. I don't know. These people are not following God's plan for us, and that can go in so many ways. It's just become all wicked, and that kind of ties into abortion, and that's a major. The feminist movement are
Mm-hmm.
definitely advocating for that. That's one of the major things. They have those marches and everything. And when you look at it, like I was watching something like a pro-life versus a pro-abortion movement, like those marches,
Yeah.
and you can clearly see which one is more peaceful. Like the pro life, everyone's like smiling and caring and kind to each other and is calm and peaceful. Whereas the women's march was like everyone's screaming and swearing and yelling their opinion, and like no one's gonna listen to you. Like if you have something that you want to say, whether you're right or not, like you should say it with like a kinder a kinder way of doing that, because no one's gonna listen to you if you're screaming. Like that goes with anything really.
Yeah.
But it's yeah, they say because they have a right over their body, and we do. We have like we are in control of our body. But if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to make a choice to um you know be intimate with someone and not accept the consequence of having potentially having a child, then that is completely on you and not on the child. The
Yeah.
child should not have to suffer and die, be murdered by their parents, their mother, because their mother made a mistake, a choice that,
Yep.
oh, it's,
And yeah, the statistics are frightening for a lot of this stuff. But like even like saying like the argument where it's like the baby is just a clump of cells. I believe in the when the cells unite, that thing's a child, and you know they've done stuff like with in vitro fertilization, which is the process of it's just like they make the baby in a dish, right?
hmm
They can tell the gender in one day. One
that is
day.
crazy. Oh my goodness.
If that thing is a clump of cells, tell me how they can tell the gender of that. That is not a no. That's no longer just cells, right?
Yeah.
The cells, it's like the cells duplicate, over
Yeah.
time that become a child. Like that thing is living, right? I don't
Yeah.
care whether they say it has a heartbeat. Like it doesn't matter. These cells united. What are they united for? They don't just unite for no reason. They're united
hmm
because it's meant to create a living being, right?
Yeah.
So, and arguably most abortions happen way, way after the point of, where the baby is no longer cells. They're like at least somewhat formed to an extent.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really sad. And a lot of it, like, um, they may argue, like, oh, well, the baby was a product of rape or whatever. And that's a really, it's such a horrible circumstance. But, I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
happens. It's a really low percentage, though, if you look at the stats. Um, but still, it's not the child's fault that um, his parents made, or of the father, especially if it's assault, if like he made a horrible decision. And it's really heartbreaking. It does happen when young teens can get pregnant, but
Mm-hmm.
um, there are ways like they can go seek help, and there's just other avenues than aborting. Like, it's
Yeah.
really sad to hear stories of people who've done it and immediately, like, they regret it and it's haunted them for years. Like,
Yeah.
so many stories of that. It's not
There,
an easy decision.
there have been countless of stories where there have been teens that didn't even know they were pregnant. They had the child and they instantly had motherhood instincts kick in, and they instantly loved that child even though they didn't even know the father.
hmm
And yes, that like again, the origin of how they got pregnant might have been a different story. But honestly, when you use rape as a gunfire to defend abortion, it honestly is doing, I feel like, a lot of disservice to the people who have experienced rape, because it's like that's such a slow majority. According to abort73.com, they did a study in 2004 where they asked the women who had an abortion um, why, like, the reason for their pregnancy, and less, or 0.5% or less, was the victim of rape. So take that into account. They're how like honestly, how dare they use that as a a point to make for defending abortion when it's not even 1% of the cases of abortion. Like, that is honestly, it's disgusting in a way that they use that.
Yeah.
And let's just look at the other statistics here. 25% say that they're not ready for the child. 23% say they can't afford it. They can't afford to have the child. 19% say they don't want to have children because they're done having children. 8% say they don't want to be a single mother. 7% say they're not mature enough to raise a child. 4% would interfere with education or their career. We talked about that before, right? 4% say physical health problems, and 3% fetal health problems. I want you to listen back to all of those points and tell me how many are the baby's fault.
Zero.
Absolutely nothing, right? They want to pursue a career instead of raising a kid. Well, I'm sorry. You're the one that decided to get intimate with somebody unprotected, or possibly, you took that risk knowingly that that was a possibility. Um, and you sacrificed a child's life for that. And I think that's truly, like, that's disgusting when you think about that.
Yep. And also a lot of some more stats here. A lot of the age range Yes, there are teen pregnancies. It makes up like, well, under 15.2%, 15 to
Mm-hmm.
19, 8.2%. But the majority of abortions happen between 20 and 34. So that's 20 to 24, 27.9%, 25 to 29 years, 29.3%, and 30 to 34 years is 19.9.
Yeah.
And then, a smaller percentage is above 34 years. But like that's the prime time that most women have children. Like if you're not at a state like um, it could be a result of your lifestyle, right? If you're out
Yeah.
partying and drinking and
And that's what
you're,
cultures evolve to,
oh
for
yeah,
sure.
it all relates to culture and society's way of thinking, right? You can
Mm-hmm.
just do anything, you can have fun while you're young, and you won't have any consequences. There's always consequences for your actions, whether they're good or bad, and you always have a choice, but that
Yeah.
choice will result in consequences. So
Every single decision we make has a consequence, and
mm-hmm.
whether that be good or bad, a consequence doesn't isn't. And I feel like consequence has a negative connotation, but like a consequence is just a result of what an action, like of an action, right? Like it could be
Yep.
good or bad. Um, yeah, going back to the age range, 20 to 29 years is the majority of the age who have an abortion. Um, and yeah, that comes with culture and partying, and I feel like nowadays sex has become less of a unification of two people who are married and love each other to almost just an act, just a physical act, which is honestly like it shouldn't. It's just been like, I don't know. It's been so. I feel like as it should be. I believe that like yikes. I feel like intimacy with another human, like another person, should be kept sacred and not really talked about, because really it's like no one wants to hear about that, right? Like, and I feel like everyone else is bragging about how they lost their virginity. Like, it's honestly disgusting. Like, that's a normal thing for people to talk about
Yeah.
nowadays. So culture has just like, yeah, and I think that's the reason why these like statistics are so frightening, is because of the fact, like, yeah, um, sex has no longer become sacred. It's just a thing that you can do because you're 20, and yeah, nothing has an effect on you because you're invincible at this age, right?
Yeah, totally. You know
Like,
everything. But
yeah,
yeah, it's so sad. Like it talks about in the Bible, the devil prowls around like a roaring lion who seeks to devour anything and
yeah,
anyone. And so he takes things that are sacred and beautiful that God created and distorts them into an
yeah,
evil thing, right? Like
yeah,
there's so many things, pretty much like everything we talked about, how things are being distorted in our society was once a beautiful thing. And it's really sad.
yeah, yeah. And some more frightening statistics. In 2020, there were 930,000 abortions, around about 930,000. That's 930,000 lives lost to this world because of majority making a careless act to get intimate with somebody. Um, and that's, if you think about it, like, yeah, that's a lot of people. If you think about having 930,000 babies in one room, like, that is insane, right? Like,
Yep.
yeah, it also made me think of the story from Joseph, where it's like, he was thrown into slavery, but then at the end of the story he was like, what you meant for evil, God meant for good. And I think there's a lot of things that like can be twisted around the other way too. Like, I think the abortion argument can also be used as like a way to like just show you how the world is going towards this stuff, and to just like wake people up. Like, you're killing babies at the mercy of the healthcare system. You can just walk into a clinic and do it, right? And I think we can. I think again, this we can wake people up and say, hey, like, this is like this is not right. Like, this is disgusting to see. And I think that's the other thing. We can turn these awful statistics into what we're doing right now on this podcast, preaching about these statistics and like waking people up, saying, hey, like, this is frightening when you really look at the actual analytics of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, exactly. Um,
All right, I'm
yeah,
recording.
what I was going to add is I feel like a lot of us, I mean, even like us included, I feel like we can be almost conditioned. Like, if we don't think about it, we can almost be conditioned by the way the world is if we're not in the Word daily and not applying God's words to our life.
Yeah,
Because, I've had sometimes I'm like, oh, that's gross, but then I just dismiss it instead of like really, I mean, you
absolutely.
don't always want to like focus on the negative parts of the world, but you also want to make sure that you have that, like, in the Bible it says, I feel like the closer you get to God, the more you'll hate sin. And also that comes with like repentance too. Like, once you repent and turn from your sin,
Yeah.
and the more you're living out God's will for your life, the more you'll turn and hate the sin that you used to commit. So I don't know. It seems like our generation, our world seems so lost and hopeless. But as long as we keep to the hope that Jesus brings, and that there's still hope of redemption for a lot of people, and that we have the gift to be able to share that with people. I feel like a lot of time, me especially, like, I kind of forget that. I'm like, oh yeah, I need to really actually talk to people about, like, because that's the only way to change someone is God has to change and soften their heart. Like,
Yeah, there's like constant I actually recently read a story about a person called Nicholas Cruz, and he was a person who was convicted of a school shooting. Um, and it's actually sad because like a lot of stuff released about him, and they found a drawing that he made, and it was very demonic, and I think that just goes to show you that like yeah, like what can happen to a person when they're exposed to stuff like that, like what they can do. This guy killed, I think it was like 17 students in this school. So it was one of the deadliest shootings in Parkland. And I think that yeah, it goes to show you like I think to an extent mental illness it's a real thing, but I think a lot of it can be rooted in the like demonic possession. But it's so heartwarming. When he was interviewed by his like when he was when he met for like sorry, when he met his brother for the first time after the arrest that was made on him, his brother said, "Get close to God, because He's the only one that can help you." And I think that it goes to show you that like, and he was actually really accepting of it, the shooter. And it's like I think it goes to show you like anybody at their lowest point can awaken to the word. Like it doesn't matter how awful they are, how awful of a person, or how awful they committed. Like we are called to love those people, and it's very hard, right? Like this kid killed innocent lives at the mercy of an AR-15, right? So but yeah, we are called to love those people and just
mm-hmm.
pray for them, because like yeah, these people, like a lot of those people fall into a like the culture of doing this, and they end up doing something that a lot of people don't imagine or don't even understand how someone could get to the point of even thinking of doing that, right? But I think that's exactly where it roots from, is like demonic possession.
Totally. And I think a lot of us, I mean, some Christians or non Christians, we don't really think of the spiritual realm. And there's definitely a lot of that spiritual
Oh yeah.
warfare. And I've been trying to like get more into that and understanding how that works. Um, but yeah, so much of the world today is just influenced by demonic powers. And we have to think like it's not just flesh and, like it says, we're not fighting against flesh and blood, but about the dark powers of this world.
Yeah.
And what those people who commit those things, or even the people, whether it's in the LGBTQ community or the feminism community, they a lot of the time they know they are doing something wrong, or that they know Christians will think they're doing something wrong. And what
Yeah.
they need is love.
Yep.
And I think we talked about, I can't remember if it was like last episode or the first one, about accepting people and not supporting their actions.
Yeah.
And so
Exactly.
they don't need judgment. Like from only God, they need judgment because He is the ultimate judge. But we are supposed to love um, and take them in. And there's this verse in Proverbs that I really like is the if you correct a fool, he will hate you. if you correct a wise man, he will love you. So we are supposed to, correct our friends and brothers and sisters in Christ, so we can be better, whether be a better sister, or brother, or
Yeah.
friend, or whatever. But sometimes, like, love is all it takes to change someone's heart, and
Yeah.
love from God, right? That Holy Spirit working in you can work in someone else if you just love them and show Christ's love for them instead
Yeah.
of just judging them. It can be easy to judge others, and I think we're supposed to know, like, oh, what they're doing is wrong, do not follow in their example,
Yeah.
but go to love them anyway.
Yeah, and like going back to like this guy, his brother was constantly telling like I love you, like I love you, I've always loved you, right? And like he started crying like in out of nowhere, right? And this guy was like very very like emotionally shut down just because he was at such a low point in his life, right? Um, and that is insane. Like I think that's really cool. What love does to a person. That's just like I really think that like it was Jesus' love in that moment because it's like you know this guy was like genuinely like so like just shut down as a person because of like I don't know it he was just I picture him as a jail cell like he just felt like he was just in a jail cell where he couldn't even feel anything to a point. It was just like he was just like a shell, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's so cool, like even like I've had experiences with changing kids' lives through like ministry and stuff, and it's just so awesome to see that kid just like I'm not saying crying is a good thing to see, but it's really cool to see it in a sense that like they see like themselves like being cleaned up inside, and like
Mm-hmm.
having that rock that in their heart that just gets dropped, and you can just see them full of the Spirit, and it's just so awesome to see.
Yeah, that's the greatest thing, especially with kids too.
Yeah,
Like, that goes back to kids who are taught differently,
yeah,
whether and that also, whether they were some people were, whether it was they were victimized or abandoned, and or they had like not loving parents. I was reading something like people who don't have loving relationships in their life have a higher mortality rate, and like psychological problems.
yeah,
So a lot of, not, I'm not saying all mental illness, but a lot of it stems from somewhere in their life a lack of balance with something, whether it's love or support or whatever. Um, but yeah, if you love your children and you teach them to fear the Lord and you teach them the right path,
yeah,
you will, like, that's
yeah.
the greatest.
And it's funny because this episode's coming all back full circle, bro. Like,
Yeah.
um, the importance of having a female and male figure, right? Like having an
Hmm.
important thing because yes, if you don't have a proper male figure in your life, you have a higher mortality rate. It's just statistics. Same with
Yep.
not having a proper female figure. Like it is like it's you it like it there's a giant rabbit hole of what affects a kid's mental health and later in life and in the present just by how they're raised. Like it is
Hmm.
insane. Um, what like how that kid develops habits, what their way of life, what groups they get into because of the fact that they have lack of morals, depending on what they're taught, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, crazy world out there.
Yeah, sure is. Yeah, it was kind of a deep episode, but I like to end on a kind of a light note. There is hope. You just have to
Yes,
be open to look for it and not be discouraged by the way things are, but be
absolutely.
encouraged by the way things will be in eternity.
And again, full circle, bro. Like, yes, what God meant for evil. Sorry, what? Oh, jeez, that was bad. What they meant for evil, God meant for good, right? Like, there is
Yes.
hope, right? We can change things. We can change evil things and pursue them in a good way. And,
Hmm.
we can take terrible. We can take terrible. Like again, like we took a school shooter and we used an example to teach you guys about love and what that does, right? Like
Yeah.
that's insane, right? So I think
Yeah.
that's a good. I think that's a good way to end this episode. I think that was really
Yeah.
good.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say?
No, I just hope this encourages you as
Yeah.
much as it was a kind of a heavy topic. I hope that um, you just remember there's still hope. There
Yeah.
is you control your actions and your decisions. So walk in the right path, the narrow path, meaning like not what everyone else does.
Yeah.
And you'll be rewarded by your good works, and not that you have to have good works to get to heaven, because that's not the way to heaven, but through
Yeah.
Jesus. But God calls us to be righteous, right? And to love God and love others. That's the greatest commandments. So
Good stuff.
yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. This was awesome. This was a good episode. Episode 4 coming out in the next 2 weeks. Make sure to like this podcast and subscribe if you're on YouTube, and follow if you're on Spotify. We love you guys.
Yeah.
Take care, guys. Thank you for listening.